Ladies and gentlemen, today we are pulling back a curtain that many people never even realize is there. We're stepping into the psychological landscape of narcissists, not the image they show the world, but the thoughts they keep hidden, the beliefs they quietly hold, and the way they truly see the people closest to them. Because what narcissists secretly think about you is not only unsettling, it is often the missing piece that explains years of confusion, emotional exhaustion, and self-doubt. Once you understand the lens through which they view you, their behavior stops feeling chaotic and starts revealing a very predictable pattern. This isn't about blame and it isn't about judgment. It's about clarity. Clarity that empowers you to see their actions for what they are, rather than what you hoped they would be. And once you understand that, everything begins to change. When you look at the inner world of a narcissist, the most striking truth is that they do not see you as a full, complex human being. They see you as an accessory to their ego, a tool that fits into the story they are trying to tell about themselves. This is not because you lack value, it is because they lack the emotional capacity to recognize it. To them, the people in their lives are roles rather than relationships. You are the admirer, the supporter, the fixer, the audience, the provider of validation. In their internal script, your feelings are not part of the narrative. Your boundaries are inconveniences. Your needs are interruptions. Everything is filtered through the question, how does this serve me? And if the answer is it doesn't, they disengage emotionally in ways that can feel cold, dismissive, or shockingly indifferent. This mindset is rooted in their fragile self-esteem. Even though they often appear confident or self-assured, that exterior is propped up by constant external reinforcement. They need people around them to maintain the image they are desperately trying to uphold, and that means they see you less as a partner or friend and more as a stabilizer for their identity. When you give them admiration, they feel powerful. When you challenge them, even gently, they feel threatened. This is why they react with defensiveness, anger, or dismissiveness. It's not the criticism that hurts them. It's the reminder that their self-worth is unstable, and they need to restore their sense of superiority quickly. In daily interactions, this shows up in subtle ways. They may ignore your achievements while exaggerating their own. They might assume you are always available for their emotional needs, but become distant when you need support. They may treat your generosity as an obligation rather than a gift. These behaviors are signs of how they categorize people, not by who you are, but by what function you serve. And because they lack empathy in a deep, consistent way, they don't register the emotional impact of their actions on you. They aren't thinking about how their words land, how their silence hurts, or how their expectations drain you. They are thinking about how to maintain the upper hand, how to keep their world orderly, and how to ensure you play your role without asking for too much. Understanding this does not excuse their behavior, but it does reveal a hidden truth. Their inability to see you clearly is not a reflection of your worth, but a limitation of theirs. You could be remarkable, loyal, loving, and supportive, and they would still see you only through the narrow lens of their own needs. A narcissist's greatest assumption about you is that you won't see through them. They rely heavily on the idea that their charm, confidence, and emotional unpredictability will keep you off balance, just enough that you won't recognize what they are doing. At the core of this belief is their dependence on confusion. Confusion is their quiet weapon because it creates self-doubt, and self-doubt keeps you compliant. They count on you questioning your own perceptions more than you question their behavior. When they contradict themselves, dismiss your concerns, or deny something they clearly said, they aren't being careless. They are reinforcing the idea that your reality is unreliable and theirs is the one you should defer to. This assumption grows stronger when you are empathetic or conflict avoidant, because those traits make you more willing to give second chances or justify their actions in ways that minimize your discomfort. They notice this. They notice when you apologize first, even if they started the argument. They notice when you soften your tone to avoid upsetting them. They notice when you hesitate to call out their hypocrisy. And they store these observations like tools in a toolbox. To them, your emotional intelligence becomes something they can use rather than something they respect. They assume that because you care, you won't push back. Because you listen, you won't question. Because you try to understand them, you won't hold them accountable. Gaslighting becomes their method of maintaining this dynamic. When they tell you you're too sensitive or imagining things or that a conversation never happened, they are not just denying reality. They are reinforcing their belief that you are easy to destabilize. They think that if they can make you doubt your own memory or instincts, you will rely more on their version of events. That reliance gives them power. And the more power they feel, the more confident they become that you won't see what's happening behind the mask they present to the world. They underestimate your awareness because they assume you're too emotionally involved to step back and analyze their behavior objectively. They mistake your patience for weakness and your kindness for naivety. They believe they can stretch your boundaries, shift your expectations, and change the rules without you noticing. What they don't consider is that even the most patient person eventually starts connecting the dots. Narcissists misjudge the quiet strength of people who endure. They forget that confusion is not permanent, and that clarity, once it arrives, is powerful enough to unravel everything they were so sure you'd never understand. A narcissist looks at your empathy in a way that is almost completely opposite to how a healthy person would. Where most people see empathy as warmth, understanding, emotional depth, or a sign of strength, a narcissist sees it as an open doorway. Your compassion becomes something they believe they can step through whenever it benefits them. They recognize that you are someone who tries to understand rather than judge, someone who offers patience instead of punishment, someone who gives chances even when they are undeserved. Instead of valuing this, they treat it as an exploitable resource. They expect your forgiveness to be automatic, your tolerance to be endless, and your kindness to be unconditional. They rely on it the way some people rely on tools they assume will always be available. This mindset explains why they often respond to your empathy with entitlement. If you show concern when they are upset, they label it as your responsibility. If you comfort them after they hurt you, they interpret it as proof that you will always absorb the emotional consequences of their behavior. If you try to have a calm, thoughtful conversation about an issue, they see it as your willingness to fix problems they created. They do not view your emotional labor as a gift or an offering. They view it as something you owe them simply because they want it. And the more consistently you provide this emotional support, the more they believe it is your role to keep doing so. Your empathy also becomes a shield they hide behind. When they cross a boundary, act carelessly, or behave selfishly, they assume you will take their past, their stress, or their struggles into account. They expect you to rationalize their actions and fill in the emotional gaps they never bother to address. They don't need to take responsibility if they believe you'll explain away their behavior for them. This is why they often show little remorse, not because they don't know they hurt you, but because they assume you will make the situation emotionally manageable. They expect you to cushion every blow, forgive every oversight, and absorb every disappointment. At the same time, they see empathy as something they can never truly possess in the same way you do. Deep down, they are aware of the emotional shallowness they struggle with, even if they never admit it. This awareness fuels a quiet resentment. They see in you a depth they cannot reach, a softness that doesn't exist within them, and a genuineness they cannot replicate. Rather than appreciating it, they diminish it. They frame your empathy as weakness because doing so helps them maintain the illusion that they are the stronger one. In reality, your empathy reveals a strength they cannot comprehend, and that strength is often what ultimately disrupts their control. One of the most revealing truths about narcissists is how deeply they fear your independence, growth, and self-awareness. On the surface, they may act as though they want you to succeed, evolve, and become your best self. But internally, the reaction is very different. Your growth threatens the dynamic they rely on. When you become more confident, more grounded, or more aware of your own worth, you become harder to manipulate. You become someone who can question their behavior, set boundaries, or even walk away. For a narcissist, that shift feels like a loss of control, and control is the foundation of the connection they try to maintain with you. They are quietly unsettled when you achieve something meaningful. A new accomplishment, a personal breakthrough, a healthier mindset, or even new knowledge disrupts the psychological hierarchy they try to preserve. In their world, they must always be the superior one, the more important one, the more impressive one. They rely on the idea that you depend on them in some emotional, relational, or psychological way. When that dependency shows signs of weakening, it ignites a fear they rarely show openly. Instead, they disguise it with subtle dismissiveness, sarcasm, or indifference. They may downplay your achievements, question your decisions, or make you feel as though what you're doing isn't as significant as you know it is. Your growth also forces them to confront their own stagnation. Narcissists resist introspection, accountability, and change because these things threaten their fragile sense of identity. When they see you evolving, it reminds them of what they are unwilling or unable to do. That reminder breeds insecurity, and insecurity in a narcissist often turns into sabotage. They may create unnecessary conflict right when things are going well for you. They may overwhelm you with sudden emotional needs when you finally have time for yourself. They may plant seeds of doubt in your mind, make subtle comparisons, or imply that your success is temporary or undeserved. This fear extends to your self-awareness as well. When you begin to understand patterns of manipulation, when you start recognizing red flags, or when you become emotionally stronger, they sense it long before you say a word. Narcissists are highly attuned to changes that might reduce their influence. They notice when you stop reacting the same way, when you express yourself with clarity, or when you no longer accept blame for things that aren't yours. These shifts make them uneasy because they unravel the psychological hold they depend on. At the core, what they truly fear is losing the version of you that was easier for them to dominate. The version that doubted yourself, accommodated them, and put them first, even when they didn't deserve it. Your empowerment disrupts the dynamic they counted on, and that disruption reveals how dependent they truly were on your lack of independence all along. A narcissist's relationship with envy is complex, deeply rooted, and often hidden beneath layers of arrogance or indifference. They rarely admit envy openly, but it pulses beneath their behavior in ways that become unmistakable once you understand the pattern. When they look at you, they don't just see a person, they see qualities they cannot genuinely access within themselves. Your kindness, for instance, is not something they can replicate because theirs always has an agenda attached. Your stability threatens them because it highlights the emotional chaos they try to hide. Your authenticity makes them uncomfortable because they rely heavily on masks, personas, and performances to navigate the world. Every quality in you that comes naturally becomes a silent reminder of what they lack. This envy shows up in subtle behaviors that can feel confusing when you don't realize what is fueling them. If you receive praise, they might respond with sarcasm or faint compliments that feel more like veiled criticism. When you display resilience during difficult times, they may belittle your strength or attribute your progress to luck rather than effort. If you are consistent in your values, they may try to provoke you into acting out of character, just to prove you aren't who you appear to be. These actions often stem from their discomfort with seeing you embody traits they wish they had but cannot sustain. They may also try to compete with qualities you weren't even trying to showcase. If you are naturally nurturing, they may attempt to appear more caring in public while ignoring your emotional needs in private. If you are intelligent or thoughtful, they may try to dominate conversations or fact-check you in ways meant to assert superiority. If you are emotionally grounded, they may try to destabilize you just to bring you back to a level where they feel more in control. Their envy isn't just about wanting what you have. It's about resenting the ease with which you have it, while they must construct their identity artificially. Deep down, they feel a quiet humiliation whenever you shine. Your strengths act like a mirror that reflects their inadequacies, and since they cannot tolerate feelings of inferiority, they reshape that discomfort into devaluation. They convince themselves that what you possess isn't valuable, that your qualities are exaggerated, or that you are not as special as others believe. This psychological dismissal protects their ego while allowing them to maintain the illusion of superiority. Their envy also makes it difficult for them to genuinely celebrate your successes. Even small wins for you feel like losses for them. Your growth disrupts the emotional hierarchy they depend on. So instead of encouraging you, they withhold support or offer negativity wrapped in concern. They cannot fully appreciate your light because it makes the shadows in their inner world impossible to ignore. A narcissist operates with a quiet but persistent belief that no matter how they treat you, you will stay. This assumption is rooted in the patterns they observe early in the relationship. When you show patience, they interpret it as permanence. When you show loyalty, they interpret it as surrender. When you try to understand their wounds or their past, they interpret it as a sign that you will tolerate whatever behavior they choose to exhibit. They become convinced that their charm, their intermittent kindness, and the emotional pull they create are strong enough to keep you from leaving. They don't see your heart as something to honor. They see it as something they can depend on even when they don't deserve it. This belief shapes how they behave during conflicts. They assume you will accept their excuses even when they are thin. They assume you will minimize your own hurt just to keep the peace. They assume you will give another chance, then another, and then several more. They rely heavily on the emotional hooks they planted early on. The intense attention, the flattery, the promises, the moments that made you feel chosen. They know those memories are powerful, and they expect you to cling to them, even when their behavior contradicts the person they pretended to be. To them, your attachment is a guarantee rather than a responsibility. They also count on the fact that you will continue doubting your own worth. If they can keep you questioning yourself, they can keep you dependent on their approval. They may criticize you subtly, compare you to others, or point out your insecurities just enough to make you feel like they are the only ones who will accept you. This is not affection, it is strategy. They assume you will keep proving yourself, keep trying harder, keep adjusting your standards just to hold on to the connection you believed was real. They underestimate your strength because they only look at the moments when you were vulnerable, not the resilience you had before they arrived. Their assumption that you won't leave also shows in how they handle your boundaries. When you express a limit, they push it. When you ask for respect, they test how serious you are. When you say you're done, they use charm, guilt, or emotional theatrics to pull you back. They don't believe you mean it because they think the attachment they created is unbreakable. In their mind, they have already decided the role you will play, and they assume you will play it indefinitely. What they fail to realize is that staying tolerant is not the same as staying forever. People with empathy, patience, and depth often give chances because they hope for change, not because they lack the ability to walk away. Narcissists misread kindness as captivity. They cannot imagine that the same quiet heart they underestimated is capable of leaving without warning, rebuilding without their presence, and healing without looking back. In the end, what makes narcissistic behavior so disorienting is not just the manipulation or the emotional unpredictability, it's the hidden lens through which they view you. When you understand that they see you not as a whole person, but as a source of validation, control, comfort, and utility, everything that once felt personal begins to make sense. Their dismissiveness, their envy, their sabotage, and their assumptions about your loyalty all come from a place of deep insecurity and emotional immaturity. None of it reflects your worth. None of it defines who you are. If anything, their behavior reveals more about their limitations than it ever does about your value. You begin to understand that your empathy, your strength, your growth, your independence, these were never the weaknesses they tried to convince you they were. They were the very qualities that challenged them threatened them, and ultimately exposed the cracks in their constructed identity. And while they believed you would stay regardless of how they behaved, what they underestimated most was your capacity for clarity. Once you see the dynamic for what it is, you stop participating in the script they wrote for you. You reclaim your emotional space, your self-respect, and your inner peace. The real shock is not what narcissists think about you. It's what you realize about yourself when you step out of their shadow. You discover that your compassion is powerful, that your boundaries matter, and that walking away is not a failure, but a reclaiming of your voice. The moment you understand the truth behind their behavior is the moment their influence begins to fade. And what remains is a stronger, wiser version of you, one that no longer bends to fit their needs, but stands firmly in your own worth.